The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78.
Chapter 40. Making It Better. The day after the break-in of Snape's office, the Carrows did indeed step up patrols in the corridors at night. Word had gotten out that the headmaster's office had been breached, so the Carrows had begun posting members of their own enforcement brigade outside of important offices, including McGonagall's. The enforcement brigade made Umbridge's inquisitorial squad look like a group of brownie guides working towards their jobs badges. Led by Vincent Crabbe, the enforcement brigade was known to hex first and ask questions later. Madame Pomfrey had taken on several seventh-year interns in the hospital wing to keep up with the enforcement brigade's victims. Hermione worried about how she would get in touch with Harry to let him know that they'd been unsuccessful. If McGonagall's flu was no longer an option, could she risk sending an owl? It wasn't until Draco commented about how he was surprised that Muggles survived without a flu network that she hit upon the solution. She enlisted the help of Thorn, who carried a note to her father. While she waited for a response, she perfected a modified bubblehead charm to allow it to encase objects. She was surprised when Thorn returned at midnight the next night carrying a small box. Inside of the box, wrapped carefully in a beautiful scarf, was a state-of-the-art mobile phone. The smooth silver and grey brick was as big around as a Mars bar, weighed twice as much as one, and fit perfectly in her palm. The note from her father explained that he'd sent the same one to Harry that day, and included the wizard's number. Hermione had to marvel at that. She thought it would take at least a week to get the mobiles. Dads really were resourceful sometimes. Hermione explained to Draco when it arrived. It occurred to me that wizarding enchantments would be looking for wizarding ways of communication. Flues, owls, perhaps even two-way mirrors or enchanted parchments. The extraordinary amounts of magic within Hogwarts would normally interfere with the signal, but by modifying the bubblehead to dampen the effects of magic in a highly localized area around the mobile phone, this works perfectly well to securely communicate with Harry. Right, Draco said, with a bit of uncertainty at this explanation.
Draco regarded the device with a mixture of suspicion and jealousy, particularly when he learned that Hermione had gotten it to keep in touch with another wizard. However, his objections ended when she showed him the game Snake on the little device. Now, he didn't seem to mind having the mobile at all. Hermione chose Harry's number, helpfully already programmed into the contacts, along with Richard, Linda, and Narcissa. The wizard answered on the first ring.
Hermione?
Yes. How did you know it was me? She faltered in momentary confusion.
Your dad put your number in my mobile. Blimey, I never thought I'd have a mobile phone all my own.
Hermione smiled a bit sadly at this. Harry truly had grown up as an afterthought in his own home, having never really received a gift all his own. She explained briefly the outcome of the previous night's adventure.
So, that's that, huh? No sword?
Harry said dejectedly. Afraid not, Hermione said sympathetically. Snape refused to hand it over because he was afraid of it falling into the wrong hands.
Such as his own?
Harry bit out. Hermione bit her lip and plunged ahead. I read in Hogwarts history that the sword presents itself to a worthy Gryffindor in times of need or valor.
Harry blew out a breath. Well, thanks for trying, anyway. I knew Snape would be no help,
Harry said in disgust. After a few parting words, Hermione pressed the button to end the call and tossed the little Nokia back onto Draco's bed, where he snatched it up eagerly.
You seem upset. Ask what we do next,
Draco asked, pushing the little buttons to move the snake around the digital screen frantically, trying to eat the food. I told him if we thought of anything, we'd let him know. Draco must have lost the snake game he was playing, because he looked up with a wry smile and tossed the mobile back onto the bed after a moment.
It was smart to tell him that you read that in that book. If he knew that it was what Snape told us, he'd likely try and storm the head's office himself tomorrow for it.
Late autumn, 1997. In answer to the enforcement brigade, Dumbledore's army regrouped and began meeting often. Interest in them grew considerably, as did their numbers. Though most of the students at Hogwarts still avoided or overtly detested Hermione and Draco, others noticed how Neville and Ginny, now the de facto leaders of the Dumbledore's army, now treated them as friends. Hermione was no longer hexed behind her back, but nor was she welcomed back into the Gryffindor dormitories. For her part, Hermione formed her own secret group of sorts, though they dispensed with coming up with names, for once. Ginny and Neville at first met her and Draco in the remote stacks of the library. However, after a close encounter with Harper, a member of the enforcement brigade, they agreed to meet in Pansy and Hermione's room. Draco would sneak the two Gryffindors in with disillusionment charms. They would discuss defensive techniques, how to project shield charms to protect others around them, and how Harry, Ron, and their families were doing outside of Hogwarts. Hermione and Draco never divulged Harry's hunt for the Horcruxes, but they emphasized that Harry was actively working on a way to defeat the Dark Lord. This worked out well until a night in early December in which Pansy returned unexpectedly early, from a date gone badly.
"What's all this?" Pansy asked, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion of 3 additional people, including 2 Gryffindors.
Hermione began, but her mind was blank. It was Draco who spoke up.
"Pans, you know what this is. You'd best leave if you don't want to be involved in this. I know you prefer to stay neutral."
Pansy looked at each of them carefully, appraisingly. Finally, she tossed her cloak onto her trunk and kicked off her tall black heels, settling onto her duvet with a slow smile.
"I'll stay."
Hermione looked startled.
"You're sure?"
Pansy huffed out a breath.
"Long time ago, Draco told me the first time I tried to make conversation with you, to make it better. At the time, I thought he was just being his usual asshole self. But as I've thought more about it, I've come to realize that maybe I can do more to make it better."
Everyone was quiet, waiting for her to say more. Pansy looked down at her hands on her lap, seemingly looking at something that wasn't there. She struggled to get her words out.
"My father came home one day this past summer, with his hands covered in blood. He was shaking, not like he was afraid. It was more like he couldn't control his body. His eyes twitched. He was stuttering. Mother said it was the after effects of the Cruciatus curse."
Ginny sucked in a breath. Neville listened with hardened stoicism. Hermione and Draco nodded sadly, having seen the effects themselves. Hermione wiped away a tear as it raced down her cheek.
"Next morning he was in a better state, and I asked him about the blood. He said—"
Here Pansy's voice went up an octave, and she paused to gather herself again. Then she continued,
"He said he was on a mission to kill a Muggle-born, his half-blood wife, and their family, and that he hadn't wanted to go. He knew the man from years before. He was a good man, he said. But you know who has threatened my family in the past, and Father knew that this would be more of the same. So it was this other family, or our family.
and Father knew that if he didn't go, someone else would."
Fresh tears spilled from Pansy's eyes, and everyone waited with dread to hear the rest of her tale.
"Father said all he could think about as he killed this family was that, at least for that night, we'd still be safe. But then—"
She paused again, overcome by tears, and Neville reached into a pocket to withdraw a clean handkerchief. He held it out to her, but she couldn't see it through her tears. Neville came to sit on the bed next to Pansy. He gently lifted her chin, pressing the cool white cloth to her cheeks to absorb her tears. Pansy looked at him at first fearfully, but then with the most open, sincere look of wonder. Her tears were momentarily dry. "Go on," Neville said softly. There were several more seconds of silence before Pansy spoke again, oddly calmer now that she looked at Neville.
"They went back to Malfoy Manor to report, but it turned out they'd missed the family's oldest daughter. She's 19, and she'd been out of the house that evening. She was a Ravenclaw, only a couple of years older than us. So, because they'd missed her, he and the others on his mission were punished anyway."
Pansy drew in a deep breath, her bottom lip quivering uncontrollably.
"Father told me that he hates himself, because all he could think about afterwards was that he wished he'd killed her too."
Pansy looked away from all of them. It shamed her to admit this. When she turned her fierce gaze back on Neville, her dark eyes blazed.
"I made Father tell me the name of the girl. I owed her some money with a note, telling her to flee before someone else came to finish the job. I don't know if she did. I hope so. But one thing I do know is this. I'm not going to sit around and wait for that asshole to come for me in the middle of the night. If there's a way to take this fight to him, we should do it." After taking a moment to get over her shock, Hermione spoke up. "That's wonderful, Pansy. Let me catch you up on what we're doing here. We've mainly been focusing on defensive spells, shield charms, disarming. That's all well and good, Granger, but the time for defensive magic has passed."
Pansy raised an eyebrow at her.
"He sent the Carrows here because they're his weakest links, and he thought we would fall in line easily. We've got to show him he's wrong."
"Pansy's right," Neville said, a new fire in his eyes. "It's time for active resistance. Let's take the fight to them."
Christmas was a fun affair at the Black House, a departure from the non-Hogwarts Christmases past for Harry. Christmas at the Dursleys had been a never-ending parade of watching Dudley furiously tear through his gifts, serving food to guests, and dodging attacks from Ripper and Erskine. Truly, what kind of sick fuck was Aunt Marge for naming all of her bulldogs after serial killers? He, Ron, Sirius, and Dumbledore were joined by several Weasleys, Remus, a heavily pregnant Tonks, and the Granger family. When Hermione and Ron stole away to chat with Harry for a few minutes, talk was of the Horcruxes, and how to destroy them. "Still no luck with a sword, huh?"
Hermione asked. "No. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we can't just sit round here and wait for it to arrive. It isn't like there's going to be some amazing act of valor required between helping Sirius work on potions and libations, or watching Dumbledore knit. Don't get me wrong, Ron and I go out here and there to poke around, looking for Horcruxes or the sword, but there's no valor or courage needed for that either."
"Where have you looked?"
"All kinds of places. The site of Riddle's old orphanage, a handful of wizarding villages like Upper Flatley, The Muggle street where Riddle bought his diary. We even went one day to Borgin and Burke's under the invisibility cloak, since he worked there once. We're just running out of ideas."
"Helga Hufflepuff was from the part of Wales just outside of Cardiff. Have you checked for the cup there? Supposedly there's a few old castles you could investigate."
"Why, are you looking for Helga Hufflepuff's cup?" A curious voice interrupted them. The three of them sat in stunned silence for a moment, looking at the turquoise hair of Nymphadora Tonks. Foolishly, they had forgotten to cast a Muffliato charm before speaking.
"You don't have to tell me everything, but seeing as I'm the only Hufflepuff here, perhaps I can help."
Hermione looked at the two boys, tilting her head at them. Why couldn't Tonks help? She was an Auror, after all. What better person to help? They didn't have to divulge everything. Harry was the first to speak. He gestured her into the other room, and Ron and Hermione followed. This time, they checked that the Muffliato was in place before speaking. "We need to find the cup to help defeat Voldemort. It's tied to him," Harry said vaguely. Tonks's face went pale. "Are you telling me he's made a Horcrux?" All three sets of eyes nearly leaped from their heads. "You know about Horcruxes?" Ron asked in disbelief. "I'm an Auror. I'm a dark wizard catcher. It's literally in my job description to know all the dark shit that wizards can get up to. Yes, I know about Horcruxes. Did he make one? Why the cup?" Hermione drew in a deep breath. "He did. He made more than one, in fact. And we've got to destroy it. The problem is, nobody knows where it is." Tonks looked hard at each of them. Finally, she turned to Harry.
"Let's talk about this soon, all right? We'll figure it out. Come up with a plan."
"Do you have any idea how to destroy them? We know of fiend fire and basilisk venom, but—"
"Yeah, but those are a bit unstable, hard to come by." Tonks nodded. "Let me think on it."
When January began melting into February, Harry called to say that he and Ron planned to go to Godric's Hollow, thinking that perhaps they would find the sword of Godric Gryffindor in the ruins of his childhood home.
"Of course he would want to go there," Hermione moaned to Draco. "It's where all of this began, at least for Harry. His parents died there. He almost died there."
"So, perhaps you can end it there. What's the harm?" Draco asked.
"Don't you recall what my father said about the Dark Lord's name being taboo, and about his people keeping watch at certain locations for Harry? They have an approximation of where he is now. The only reason they can't walk in the front door is because Sirius's house is unplottable."
"Right, so even though they say the name inside the house, Death Eaters can't get inside because of the Fidelius charm."
"Exactly. But once they've left the safety of the house, all bets are off. They might slip up at any time. Add to this the fact that the Death Eaters know that there are a few places that Harry likely wants to visit."
"You think they're walking into a trap? Why not tell Potter this?"
"I have, but he's convinced that something could be there."
Harry and Ron had been planning the trip to Godric's Hollow for days. They had an old map of the town, and were using it as their guide. Harry asked seemingly innocuous questions of Sirius. Where exactly was the site of the Potter house? Did Sirius think any neighbours were still around that knew them? Where were Harry's parents buried? The two wizards worked out a plan, of sorts. If anything went wrong, they would apparate separately to the forest where the Quidditch World Cup had been held to meet up, to avoid leading any Death Eaters or Snatchers back to 12 Grimmauld Place. To Hermione, it sounded like a half-thought-out plan, but they could not be dissuaded. It was less than half thought out. They had not planned on encountering the elderly witch on the street who lured them into her home with her mysterious air. They had not realized the witch was actually Nagini, Voldemort's snake, in disguise. And they had not counted on Ron splinching himself when he landed at the campsite of the Quidditch World Cup. Hermione's texts went unanswered for hours after they were meant to return to Grimmauld Place. Finally, several hours after her last text, her mobile phone rang.
"Harry, what's happened?"
He told her everything that had transpired. "And now we're stuck here until Ron is better. My healing spells are shit, but thankfully I packed some dittany and some Muggle money. You remember the old man who ran the campsite? He had an extra tent that he loaned me. We're going to stay here a little while until Ron is better. I had to confund him. We were in a right state when we arrived."
"Are you sure it's safe?"
she asked worriedly. "No, I'm not," Harry said grimly. "But I don't have much of a choice. Ron can't be moved. It's bad, Hermione. The splinch, it went down to the bone. The snake had me pinned, and he fought it off, but then he got splinched. He's in a bad spot."
"Do you need me to come?"
Hermione asked seriously. "Don't be daft. You have enough to worry about there. I hear that Neville and his new girlfriend have been wreaking havoc every chance they get."
Hermione smiled in spite of the serious situation. "Who did you hear that from?" she asked.
"My girlfriend, who's also wreaking a good bit of havoc, at least according to her owls," Harry laughed.
Hermione chuckled. "Yes, she is." Pansy, Neville, and Ginny, along with the rest of Dumbledore's army, had been doing everything they could to destroy the Carrow's will to live. They set off dung bombs at every turn and spread temporary quicksand. They planted fireworks in the toilets, nifflers in the classroom, nosebleed nougat in with the Carrow's breakfasts. These things combined with an onslaught of hexes and jinxes were just scratching the surface. "Be careful. Don't use the name, whatever you do," she stressed. She told him a few protective enchantments to use, and bid them good luck.
"So they're camping?" Draco asked her, wrinkling his nose slightly in disgust.
"Yes," she answered.
Draco shuddered. "Better them than us."
She laughed a bit, but deep down she fretted. They were no closer to ending this thing than they'd been since the Ministry break-in. Something had to give.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.